Yeah, so like I just man, I love the eccentricities of some of these characters, right? So Evale is his father is has become like a born again, but like he's like a racist, like major like KKK, like he believes that God has is pushing him in that way, or maybe right. He Evale is definitely, I would not call it progressive. I don't know that he has those feelings, right? I mean, I'm speaking, right? I mean, that's an understatement of the year. But he's like a vegetarian. There's a secret that his dad talks about that I won't give away. I'm not quite sure that I know what it is. I think I do.
Yeah.
But I just what a cool, creative, interesting, eccentric character. Later, when they get into Evale is smart. Um, he might avail himself of his brain. Sorry, I had to. And and he like, he starts talking with like the Mexican cartels, and where they can get the, I'm not gonna pronounce pseudophenedrine, right? The Sudafed type of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so he's smart about it. So he links up. And I want to say, I'm having total brain freak. Guillermo, is that his name?
Yeah.
Guillermo, he's a freaking tough guy, and he's got his little blow pop.
Yeah.
Like, so like character choices like that, like did you just like, man, this is just freak, I want to have some fun with this, or was this like, were you going for something? You know what I mean?
Uh, I think that's just always, man. I mean, this is gonna sound opposite, but yeah, that's real life. Like
Sure,
the
sure.
tough guys are not always, big muscled up guys with
Oh
guns.
no.
Like they might have a blow popper. I don't know. I don't know. I think maybe that comes from, my experience with those great Southern writers and like especially someone like Flannery O'Connor, like there was always a character with like one of my favorite short stories with her is The Lame Shall Enter First. And
Mm.
there's this character who has this big club foot, and I don't know, like so much stuff that I read, like everything's kind of stock, like it's all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
same.
yeah, yeah.
And so it's a good way, even the names are a good, like if you see the name like Eval,
Hmm.
you're not going to confuse that. Every time his name is mentioned, you're going to know who I'm talking
Oh
about.
yeah, oh yeah.
And I think that's pretty true for all the characters,
Hmm.
in this book. Like they all kind of carry these. This might have been a um God, the name, I'm losing the name. The guy who wrote the Graveyard Book and the guy who wrote American Gods.
Neil Gaiman.
Yeah, yeah. He had this great quote about like give your characters funny hats. Um, And what he meant was like that same thing I'm talking about. Like give them memorable things
Yeah,
so that like readers aren't going back and looking, 5 pages in.
yeah.
But beyond that, I really I don't know. Like I didn't want to do a story. Because yeah, like Bun is who is Yvelle's dad, who you summed it up perfectly. It's like this born again, but like running this really like fledgling
Hmm.
KKK faction, in
Yeah.
these hills. Because like I don't know, like I just kind of felt like that was a fitting, like with everything we see on the news, like I don't know, like it didn't feel like that would be what's really booming, like
Mm.
what's but something like what Yvel's trying to do, where he's like a good word was progressive. Yeah, like he says he has a shaved head, but he's not a skinhead. It's something
Right.
that he read in a book about like Taoism, like Buddhist
Huh.
monks. Like, so he's got these weird things, and he's not afraid to go across like the racial lines, and team up with the cartel.
It's beautiful, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I didn't want it to be the same old shit. Like that
Yeah.
was, you know,
Oh, so distinctive, and because of that, such great characters and such a great read. Um, you were talking about, so like, with like the KKK, like you said, like fledgling is definitely the way to describe it. Is that kind of like a pointing the finger, like you, like was that, is that like, I don't know, satire? Is that kind of like more so like a parody, or is that just a plot thing? You know what I mean? Is that kind of like making a statement?
I don't know if making a statement is. I was doing this deal in Baltimore. Laura Lippman was kind enough to meet me at her bookstore, and we did a book event for this. And she said something that I thought was so, I loved it about this book. She just said, this is a book about white supremacists and all of this stuff that feels ripped from the headlines. And she was like, but like, it doesn't feel political. Like, it doesn't feel like there's like a message. It doesn't feel, and of course, like, I'm not like, I'm not sitting here saying like, yeah, like I mean, yeah, I would love to poke a finger at the KKK, but I always feel like when that gets done in fiction, um, I fall away. I, as a reader, fall away from the story. Like it doesn't always draw me in because it doesn't feel real.
It's like
People,
contrived.
yeah, people aren't walking around with like cardboard boxes over their chest that say, "Here are my political beliefs," and here's how I feel on top this topic, that topic, this topic.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to write about these things that were current, but I also wanted to make it timeless. Like I said, the book was finished in
Mm-hmm.
2017,
Yeah.
so 2017 is a world away from 2023.
Yeah.
And that could have really backfired if I were trying to like lace this book with so many, like pointed messages or pointed things to say. And I think that's something to remember for all novelists. If what you want to do is write stuff that hangs around,
Mm.
um, your stuff has to be. It can still say something, and I think Ozark Dog says something, but it's not. It doesn't have to be so on the nose.
I appreciate that. I mean, when I think of like a book, being too, uh, whatever I mean, timely or not being timeless,
Yeah,
I think of it as like, oh, they're like the technology they're using or whatever, it doesn't fit, it's an
yeah,
anachronism and that kind of thing. But that makes a lot of sense that like if it's a political thing or whatever the latest, flavor of the day is, that's something that takes away from the timelessness. I appreciate that. That makes sense, especially in the
yeah.
context of your book. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I can't remember. I had a point I was going to say about that too. Oh, well, I do think sometimes, um, true masterpieces can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think about like back to Bradbury, like Fahrenheit 451,
Mm.
and how that book definitely had a message. I'm not familiar enough with the time. I mean, I think it was the 50s, when it was being written, to know like how on the nose or not it was for
Sure.
that zeitgeist, but I know that it has lasted. So it's like
Mm.
it's kind of like knowing your boundaries. Like if as a writer you know that you've got your thumb on the current pulse,
Mm-hmm.
know that like you're going to really swing for this and try
Mm-hmm.
and say some shit that's going to really stick, then go for it. And if
Yeah.
you don't, then just try and create real characters or
Mm.
give a character a blow pop.
Oh man, what flavor,
Hmm.
any and
Uh,
all?
Great.
Grape. There you go. All right. So yeah, without stepping on the toes of the plot spoilers, but so Colt, who's the quarterback, and he's the homecoming date, or yeah, he's the date for Joe. He gets really much definitely involved. He's been living with the coach, and he definitely has connections with the Ledford family we talked about earlier. So Rudnick or Rudnick,
Rudnick.
right? So Rudnick also was somebody who he was killed, and so he's part of the traumas of that family as well, right? And there's obviously a lot connected to it. And like I said, it's when you talk about this small town and being so many years between murders and that type of thing, it's like it does seem like it happened just yesterday, but it was 18 years ago or 12 or um Belladonna. I mean, what a, again
Belladonna.
Belladonna again, what a great name. So what beautiful woman, Belladonna.
Yeah.
Belladonna. What I again, she doesn't fit, right? I mean, she's not like I don't know. I'm trying to think of like like she's not like the maniacal mom or something like that. She's does some nice things and generous things, and you're kind of like, why is she with Bun? Why is she with the father?
Yeah.
But what was kind of her inspiration? An inspiration for her?
I guess the same thing like what we've been saying. You look at a stereotype or you look at a trope and you think, okay, here's the wife of this guy running this KKK faction with this whole like meth ring. Um,
But she's a sweetheart.
but she's a sweetheart. Like she's still a mom. Like she's still provides for her family. And it goes back to what we were talking about with like circumstances. And And again, it goes back to everything that we've been talking about. Like that's one thing I also notice in a lot of current crime fiction is like a lot of the times characters become so predictable based on who they are or what, like it's the same character recycled
Yeah,
again
yeah,
and
yeah.
again. So, I mean, I don't know that I know I don't know any white supremacists or any belladonnas out there in the world, but I do know women who are in really tough situations, um, who are anchored to men, that are like Bunn or Evel or any of these other guys in the book, who still find ways to be a mother and
Mm.
still find ways to love their children and support their husbands, because
Mhm.
that's their lot in life. So I think that's where Bella, she's one of my favorite characters in the book.
Hmm. We do eventually get to meet Joe's mom. She's had a life.
Speaking of favorite characters, Lacey might be like, she might take,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. She's pretty quick-witted despite, the drugs. She's got some pretty quick some nice quips.
Yeah.
Right, but she definitely gets involved later, and just kind of, ideas of like, would Joe have been better off without her? Is she better off without her? Who's doing who a favor? That are just very interesting. As the book goes on, we get the drug dealing, definitely fires up, to be sure. There's a lot of action that comes with that. There's some great chase scenes, man. That are very much tied into, the creeks in parts of
Yeah.
Arkansas and the Ozarks, and very much, anchored, pardon the pun, in, the water and the place. Um, People who are listening have got to read this, because I'm like, I want to talk about something more plot things. But I'm kind of like, okay, here's maybe a good place to kind of leave off with that. Um, but so the video is always watching. That's one of those motifs that comes up again and again, and there's a lot of revelations that come from that. We talked about redemption. Jeremiah has, he has a kill list. I mean, he's called the judge. His truck was called the judge. Kind of like the judge and the executioner. Did does he see redemption for himself? Is it redemption for himself, or is it for his? Is it for Joe, and through that, his kind of like his family line and his heritage and his son?
Yeah. I think, okay, Jeremiah, there's a scene in this, like this non-denominational
Hmm.
church called Christ Zone, which in the book it's described as like a,
It's a great name, by the way, too.
yeah, Christ Zone. It's like a renovated Walmart. Like they've pulled out the cash registers and put in a pews and an altar, and he's talking to the pastor there, an ex-football coach, and he's talking about God and Jesus and the second coming, and how you know that if he were Jesus and he had died for all these people and sacrificed for the world,
Hmm.
he watched them do all the shit that they've done in the meantime, and then when it's the day of reckoning, the Bible says, Jesus is, with blue eyes of fire and a sword, he will come and
Hmm.
have a, that that Jeremiah says in the book. He says, that there's almost like some sort of, I don't know if joy is the right word, but there's some
Yeah.
sort of, that Jesus would have some sort of vengeance in his heart,
Hmm.
for the sacrifice he made and everything that, and so I think that's all a really extrapolated metaphor for what Jeremiah has done in the war, for what he's trying to do with those 18 years of sobriety,
Hmm.
and then what he's forced to do when Joanna goes missing.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Got a little bit of Liam Neeson in him, no?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Got a very particular set of
yeah. A
skills.
backwoods Taken. That would have been a good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been a good.
That'll be on the movie poster,
That's right. That's right. With
Um,
Liam Neeson in the role. Although I've always pictured Jeff Bridges. I felt like Jeff Bridges.
ooh, that would be good. Yeah, 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 yeah. Definitely. Oh man. There's Hattie, who would be Joe's grandma and Jeremiah's wife, is not, I mean, she's not mentioned a lot. She passed on years before, but there's some really important scenes with her flashbacks. And there's that symbol of the rose, right? That like it's kind of like the Tupac thing of like the
Uh,
rose that grew from concrete, right?
yeah,
He was basically watering it with whiskey.
great reference. Yeah, it's the only thing in the junkyard left. Like she planted them before she
Mm.
passed. And Jeremiah, that little bottle that he always keeps, and he has multiple bottles. When he walks in from work each night, he dumps a little on those roses.
Hmm.
They've still grown.
Yeah, right. And just like the next generation, and and Joe being part of that. And there's the scene where Jeremiah looks at that hole in the chain
Yeah,
fence, which had huge implications. There's a lot of butterfly effect there and all that. That scene was really vivid and really incredible for me. Just like, damn, like how much of a domino effect it was, right?
yeah,
And then there it is, 18 years later, it's still there, right?
yeah,
In the in one of the letters that Joe writes to her dad in jail, she basically is like talking about the dogs, and there are literally junkyard dogs that are patrolling. But she says basically, quote, some dogs you got to keep locked up is what kind of one of those things she learned in her young life. I don't know that is, I don't know if you want to talk directly about that part or just about the title, like you know Ozark dogs, like the dogs are not a huge, they don't get half the book as far as pages, but they're definitely
yep.
mentioned. There's a lot going on. What are you trying to go with that? And I don't want to have to like, I don't want you to have to nail it down if you don't want to, like, well, this exactly means, if you want to leave it up to the reader, that's fine, but just the title, I wonder about the significance of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first off, the book was so Don't Know Tough was always Don't Know Tough.
Hmm.
It was in like the first chapter I wrote of that book. It was a phrase that it was said like that you don't know tough, and I just shortened it to Don't Know Tough, and nobody ever questioned it. This book was titled originally. It was titled Junkyard Dogs, which
Okay.
was cliche.
Okay.
Then it was titled Salvation, which was also cliche, but I liked
Mm.
that it tied into like the salvage yard.
Mm.
Then I came up with Some Die Crushed. I guess I was going on
Ooh.
like the um the three word title of Don't Know Tough, Some Die Crushed.
Mm.
And it was a good buddy of mine, a guy by the name of Alex Taylor, um, who's an author in Kentucky and has the absolute best collection of short stories. I would put it up there with anything. It's called
Wow.
The Name of the Nearest River
Okay.
is his collection of short stories. He's got some novels. He's got some recent novels published in France. Um, but Alex read an early draft of this, and he, I will attribute anything I got right with
Mhm.
like Jeremiah and the Vietnam stuff. And also a lot of Yvel's quirks come
Mm.
from Alex's notes.
Oh, nice.
Alex was close to some Vietnam vets and was able to provide some really interesting details. But I think he said it as a joke.
Mm.
Like, I think, this was, like I said, like 2017, maybe 2018 by the time he got his hands on it. So that Ozark Netflix series was really hot. And he said it as
Oh
like a
yeah.
joke, he's like, what if you titled it Ozark Dogs?
Oh,
Like it's like the most like, cliche kind of. So when all of this title talk was coming around with my publisher, I told them that title. I gave them a list of all those titles I just mentioned,
mhm.
and they were just like, "Oh, it is absolutely Ozark Dogs. Like that's
Oh
exactly."
man.
But I was willing to go with it because the dogs are representative of poverty.
Mm.
Poverty, the cycle of poverty, the cycle of violence. Where we live, we find strays all the time, that have been cast aside. We'll find them tied to trees, out here, not hanging, but like just left for
Sure.
dead on the highway. And so um, I wanted that to play as a metaphor throughout the whole book. For people who maybe are not familiar with this part of the country, if you look at any of the list in terms of teen pregnancy or worst schools or whatever, Arkansas is either at the top or the bottom of all those lists, whichever, we're usually right ahead or right behind Mississippi.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that's the whole point. That's what the students that I teach, the kids that I've been around with on the football field or in classrooms, their stories, and growing up as a child of public school teachers, and going to trailers and taking kids out. My parents would take kids out, for supper and take them to the movies, and
Mm.
so I was always around kids who lived lives that were very different from mine, and I always would lean in, when they'd start talking. And so, yeah, I think the dog metaphor, and it plays really heavy in that note you read, which is Joe's last note, that that is representative of these people.
Mm. Wow, very interesting. I was definitely thinking Reservation Dogs. Have you seen that series?
Yeah,
Man,
yeah,
I keep meaning to watch more because what I've seen is like so good, man,
yeah. The
so good.
Reservoir Dogs too.
Right,
Old
oh,
team.
of course, right? Definitely. Well, this is just the beginning. Like you said, whether I'm the first or the seventh, I feel incredibly lucky to have talked to you about this book.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the third and the fourth and the fifth. You can, speaking of the fifth, you can plead the fifth if you want, but any ideas about future ones? Maybe part of you is just like, man, I'm gonna chill.
No, no, we're under contract for the third book.
Okay.
It comes out summer of 2024, and it is called Broiler.
Ooh.
So Broiler, and it is about two desperate couples who it plays out over the course of 2 days in an Arkansas chicken processing plant.
Mm.
So yeah, broiler. That's like a chicken, like what they.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Oh wow. Yeah. Like I said, in reading the book, it's just like, okay, this guy, he has it figured out. I mean, the way that everything unfurls, the characters, the eccentricities and quirks, so memorable. We didn't necessarily even talk a lot about. There's so much there about, capitalism is too vague of a term, but like the big companies leaving, right, and
yeah,
what's left in their wake. I mean, you talked about what the poverty and everything like that. There's just
yep,
so much, and like I said, I mean, this book would not have been as good if it had a heavy hand and it was didactic and it was
yep,
preaching the moral relativities, and if you want to look at it as just an action book, the storyline is just incredible. But then you throw in all those cool themes, and congrats, you that instant classic, and I hope that you're able to enjoy all this time after the Edgar and this book coming out, and it's mostly fun. I know it's busy, but I hope it's mostly fun.
yeah, man. Well, one teacher to another. Summer is coming. So
Ooh.
yeah, brother. There's some good days. The nuclear power plant plays a big part in Ozark Dogs,
Hmm.
and we live right here on the lake that was built for this damn nuclear tower. Like right, it's
Oh
a few
wow.
miles down the. We're on the Arkansas River, but it was all dammed up for this cooling tower.
Okay.
So it's literally right here in our backyard, but we don't have to look at it. And if I turn the lights out and I start glowing green, you'll know why. But I say that
Ooh.
to just say that, yeah, there's some days on the lake that are coming for the summer. I have to put this stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
heck of a muse to write about, right? With that, with the
Oh
towers
man.
and oh man.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the thing that I mean, they're like t-shirts from like our hometown that have like a big like power, like the cooling tower, like
Yeah,
in the book, Joanna calls it the cloud maker. And that came
exactly.
from my kids. They see it, and it's, pumping all that steam. And it's definitely something. I don't know what,
Man.
but it's a good place to have the climax of a Vietnam sniper novel.
Seriously. Seriously. Like I said, such a pleasure. So much enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully maybe meet you in real life down the road, or talk to you about the next one. And congrats,
Yeah,
and,
dude.
and thanks again for your time.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Such a pleasure.